Welcome to Design As, a show that's intended to speculate on the future of design from a range of different perspectives. This season, we're bringing you 6 new episodes with 6 new keywords to interrogate. In this episode, you'll be hearing 4 different design voices speak to the idea of design as care. I'm Lee Moreau, host of the Futures Archive from Design Observer, founding director of Other Tomorrows, and professor of practice and design at Northeastern University's College of Arts, Media, and Design, which hosted the 2024 Design Research Society Conference earlier this year. There, I got the chance to sit down with various guests, leaders, and speakers who are attending the conference, and we've compiled some of their voices into this episode about design as care. It's a roundtable in 4 parts. On this episode, you'll hear from Gedalia Brito.
When you're designing for humans or you're talking to a person, you have to connect to them on a more personal level. And the emotion, that emotive side, is where I think research, or design research in particular, really starts to change the way you engage.
Rachel Dietkus.
I just come from this philosophy that if we are not taking care of ourselves, if we are not taking care of one another, then we fundamentally cannot do the work. We just can't.
Sophie Hodara.
I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had about how we recover as a community, as a city, as individuals from this huge disruption, this rupture caused by COVID-19 in 2020.
And Georgia Lupi.
Because I'm a data person, what do I do as soon as I start to feel sick and having those symptoms? I start to collect data. So, for 4 years, I've been collecting data on the different kind of symptoms that I've been experiencing.
The topic of care is central to design, and it's become clear to me, both as a teacher and as a practitioner, that if you were only thinking about the work that we're doing in isolation from both the world around us and also from the humans that help to shape it and bring it life and give it direction, that if we're not thinking about the broader impact that has on us as professionals, on us as people, that we're not actually doing our job very well, that it's the process and the outcomes are so intertwined, and care has to be central to all of that. If not, we're probably not either doing our best work, or may not be doing work that really is benefiting the communities that we are trying to support. And so for this reason, I think care, and we're going to hear this in this episode, starts to take many, many different directions. Care is all around us. And let's really hear what some of these voices and some of these perspectives will help to further for us. And it's wonderful that we're both having these conversations and also listening and thinking deeply about them. We're here in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard. I'm here with Gedalia Brito. Very excited. Yesterday, we had a panel discussion. You were killing it.
Thank you, Lee.
Jada Brito is head of design for North America at Colgate-Palmolive. She also teaches design leadership in the master's program at Georgetown University. And she was one of our subject matter experts on the second ever episode of the Futures Archive, all about the toothbrush. That was back in 2021. So time really does fly, right?
Yeah, I love our toothbrushes.
I love the toothbrush. We love the toothbrush. But at that time, that was really your central role. You were in oral care at that point, right?
Correct. I was the head of toothbrush and devices and kids and device plus chemistry for oral care at Colgate-Palmolive. And since then, I've had an amazing journey. I got to work on innovation at Hills.
Remind me.
Hills Pet Nutrition in Topeka, Kansas. An amazing brand. Most people are introduced to Hills when normally their pet has a problem. But we do so much more than that. We support pet parents with their everyday care. We work heavily with the veterinary profession. And a lot of the brands at Colgate, we start with the profession first. So just fascinating, the amount of things that are baked in data, which brings us full circle of why I'm even here talking about the role of design research and just data in our everyday. And it was really nice to kind of share what I'm seeing and how I'm being brought further upstream. I think that was something that really resonated with the audience yesterday about normally design research is the afterthought, or it used to be the afterthought, or more happening toward the end of the journey, more so the end of the process. If you had 10 steps, it's sort of like step 8. Research is critical, but the type of research is changing, and the creative mind is being brought earlier and earlier into the process. And for me, that's such a win for us. A win to I think just to see how people are processing what they're learning or how it's going into solving the right problems or finding the right things, piquing people's curiosity, especially now when how you interact with a thing or how you build love with a brand has changed.
Why do you think that shift is taking place? Like with research kind of being brought in earlier in the conversation. I'm certainly thrilled to hear this, but tell us why.
It's a simple answer for me, the emotion. Right? It's the emotional side. When you think about products, when you think about science, sometimes it could be so functional and how you're talking to it or how you're going about it. But when you're designing for humans or you're talking to a person, you have to connect to them on a more personal level. And the emotion, that emotive side is where I think research or design research in particular really starts to change the way you engage.
Now, your portfolio is much bigger than pet food or oral care.
Yes. So I support home care, personal care, and Tom's of Maine for North America. So that's 11 brands.
And research throughout all that portfolio.
Yes. Especially when you're talking about things people are using to put on their bodies, things that people are using to, clean their homes, things that you use to take care of the things you wear. It's fascinating. And then when you talk about even from your body odor, how you're protecting and gauging the elements, it's just fascinating about, for me, how much science is at the center of that. But again, the research is how you're changing that messaging.
I mean, these are very personal. I have very personal opinions about how I smell or don't smell or stink or like depending on the day and the time, it's super intimate. So research must be also intimate.
And I would say what's, to me, the part that we really focus on cracking a lot is the many versions of yourself. That's the one, right? Because there's an abundance of choice. And so a lot of times in that deselection process, when you're choosing what's right for you, and if you're a caretaker, your parent, or buying for more than just yourself, you're trying to find either the items that will do the best job, or you'll find the items for each individual.
Mm-hmm.
And you're most of the time tapping that to their personality or the confidence, the way that they want to feel. It's really fascinating how, and something that we use every day or engage with every day can really change your mood, evoke confidence, help you relax, make you feel like you did a great job. You're doing good. When your home smells good, you feel like you've accomplished a lot. There's a sense of pride, right? When you're looking at like getting clean and how you feel when you come out of the shower, or when you want to unwind and take a bath, like those moments matter. And so now working on brands where I'm tapping into those everyday interactions and moments of self-care is quite fascinating.
I want to talk about, since this came up yesterday in the panel, other situations where you're the only one in the room.
Yes.
Can you talk more about that kind of balancing between what you represent as a practitioner, but also balancing that with the community that you're trying to observe and support? How do you juggle? How do you manage all of these multiple things and these multiple inputs?
I would say on a scale of being a woman and being a minority, that already holds a separate weight because I have to read the room and I have to be really mindful of the audience, and I have to kind of do my research going into even that conversation. Here we go, talking about research. You have to know what they're looking for. You have to know like what each person's tick is. So I have to make sure that in that moment that I have maybe 15 minutes of their undivided attention, that I'm going to say something meaningful that when they leave that room, it at least piques their curiosity. Another trick I do is I try to repeat maybe a couple of times, hey, like, I'm so happy to follow up if you want to ask a few more questions, or I'm really happy to follow up and schedule a one-on-one so we can kind of unpack if you really want to understand. I saw you were interested in that. I keep tapping just to say, I'm here, I'm game. If you want to, learn a little bit more, or I can take some time like off to the side and kind of take you through. But I just need to make sure that I hit the things that matter to them, not just me. I think that's the hardest part when you come into an organization. You have to realize that their decisions are so much bigger than what you're bringing to the table. And at times, the decisions that they're faced with, they're like hundreds of people coming to them and they can only probably make 5, right? Or they have the resources for 5. So you have to make the compelling argument or be consistent in making sure that in every opportunity you have, you bring it back full circle the best you can.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you are the only subject matter expert in the room. A lot of times when the bigger conversations are happening, they choose one from each area. So you have to represent all or nothing. And sometimes that's a lot to carry. So those conversations I don't take them lightly because I know that the fact that I was even invited to the table to have the conversations, what comes with that. I want to be invited back.
And let's face it, CPG, consumer packaged goods, right? It's not an easy game.
Not at all. And it's moving faster and faster. And I think that's the challenge, right? It's just fascinating to see how our industry is just evolving.
It's been a pleasure talking to you and collaborating the last couple of days.
Agreed.
Let's do more of it.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you. I'm here with Rachel Dietges at Northeastern's recording studio on June 26th. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Lee.
Rachel Dietges is a social worker and a designer, the founder of Social Workers Who Design, and she's a leader in the field of trauma-informed design. Many of our listeners are well-informed in design, but they might not know what trauma-informed design is. Can you explain that to them?
Yeah, I think a brief way of describing what trauma-informed design is that there is this consideration that trauma is prevalent, that it may be present in the types of work that we're doing, in the types of things that we are studying and trying to understand, and the very participants that we are collaborating with, inviting into the design research process, as well as the designers and the researchers themselves, that these may be things that they have also experienced, that they've encountered before they were ever a designer, or the effect that they have from the types of typically social impact, but not always just social impact work. It's a bidirectional approach to really acknowledging that both the people that we are often researching with and hopefully not researching at, as well as us as designers, that this is part of the human condition. You know, I very much focus on these trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practices. I come at design as a social worker first, a designer second. I really try to think of the two disciplines as one, though, so not even uniquely distinct or separate from one another. When I talk with students, and I have a number of students who reach out and just say, like, hey, I am thinking about studying this particular thing and there's an element of trauma that's involved, or do you have some advice on care practices that I could maybe integrate into what I'm doing? These are coming from students who are undergrad students in design, master's students and PhD students in design, really from all parts of the world. It's not just in the US, which is just fascinating. So for me, it is really just being present with those conversations. And, I have the work that I care deeply about, that I'm very passionate about, and I can see where that the interest, especially in trauma-informed practices, is really, it has just significantly grown from my lens over the past 4 years.
So this isn't necessarily trauma that's coming from some car accident or long-standing oppression from one people's to another people's. This could be just from interactions that we have in doing the work as designers. Mm-hmm. So this is highly personal. What's a workshop on that like? What's the room like?
Ooh, that's a good question. I typically try to start with some fundamentals. There are many different definitions of trauma. There are a lot of very clinical definitions, very medically driven definitions. I really take a social model approach to understanding trauma. And so I talk about it in the context of, what does this actually mean? What are some potential examples of what this might look like? And then also including the aspects of secondary and vicarious trauma, which I believe also include these aspects of moral injury, which is typically coming up quite often for students and for professional researchers. So just having this foundation, this level setting of what do some of these words mean? What do they mean in the context of design and design research and the practice that we do? And then talking through what have become some of our most traditional ways of doing design research and really examining them and understanding if what we have been doing and what we maybe have been taught if that is the most ethical and responsible and thoughtful way to do this work. So I personally, I'm coming at this with this very strong social work lens. And so I almost I don't miss a single word. When someone asks me, like, hey, Rachel, can you look at this research plan and can you just give some feedback? And sometimes I just assume that, this person who has reached out, they're not going to need any feedback. They are such a thoughtful and ethical designer. And then, I get to literally sometimes the first sentence and I start just wondering well, why are you phrasing it this way? And why are you maybe asking this question? Have you considered asking this question first as opposed to that question? Are you asking questions because you really want to know an answer or that you feel like you need to know and it would actually influence maybe improving someone's life? So just I try to take a very non-judgmental approach, working with and understanding why people are setting up the work the way that they do.
In my teaching here at Northeastern, I address I'm working with a lot of first-year undergraduate students, and they come in and there's design in their life somewhere, right? Whether it's the sneakers they love or the musicians they follow, et cetera. And it's partly my job to have them understand and appreciate that. And we kind of cherish that. There's design there. And one day you may do that, you may not. That's fine. But what you're talking about is about the care of the person as well. Mm-hmm. And I think those two things are mirrored. And I think our students both need that and also demand it too. They want to be recognized as having design in their lives, but also the fact that if I'm going to have design in my life, I'm a designer. I got to take care of myself with that in mind. This feels like the world is coming to you right now, Rachel.
I mean, what I hear as you're sharing that is that there's this desire to be seen and acknowledged. And again, these are foundational human things that we deserve to have. I come from a background, even before I was ever a social worker. So I've been a social worker for almost 15 years at this point, but I had a whole career within the nonprofit sector before that. And I just come from this philosophy that if we are not taking care of ourselves, if we are not taking care of one another, then we fundamentally cannot do the work. We just can't. We can't do the work in a way that will be sustainable and that will be healthy for both for us and for those that we profess to be helping.
I think there's something fascinating also, and I'm not an expert in this field, but we spent so much time pushing collaboration in the design world, and we just assumed that collaboration was going to yield kumbaya, everything works out, shiny happy, and actually a lot of damage was being done as we were pushing people to collaborate, people who may not have wanted to be around other people for all various reasons. Is this a kind of a correction, partly, Rachel?
In some ways, I think it is. Again, I can't help but hear what you're saying and kind of put it through this social work filter. The thing that is standing out the most to me is that, if we have historically been pushed into collaboration, having to work with other people, sometimes without having that choice and without having that autonomy and being able to exercise that agency, then it does something to us. Sometimes we can work with people who we may not philosophically agree with or who just may not be the kindest or the most welcoming of peers and colleagues. At the same time, what is truly happening is this suppression of our own needs and of our own emotions. And I think if we get into a pattern of doing that over and over and over again, we start to forget who we are. And, I'm thinking back on this training. I won't say who it was with, but it was with a group of designers who are very seasoned, very talented. And in the prep for ultimately training them on some trauma-informed design practices, I intentionally wanted to have several conversations with them, just informal conversations. Just let's talk about some things like what's coming up in the work. What are the types of things that you maybe want to hone in on? What are the very specific things that you're actually concerned about? I also had them complete a survey, and that's where there was just this next layer, layers of things that people were sharing. So it was much more intimate. Things like, I don't have anyone to go to when I have concerns or when I have problems with my work. Many people sharing, I have a history of PTSD. I am a survivor of sexual assault, and no one knows this, and this affects me, and this is truly, it drives how and why I design. And so I've been very fortunate and privileged to receive, and I think I'll also say at this point I have the ability to hold some of those stories that people share. And with this particular group, I said, we need to talk about the impact of what it really looks like to practice as a designer and to be, really doing amazing work, but to be doing that in a capacity that is your false self. It is not your true self. Your true self is not being like your authentic self, is not being, bringing your whole self to work. It isn't that philosophy. It is really making sure that you are not suppressing the parts of you that deserve to be nurtured and need to have attention. And so just spending some time talking about that, it's like I could see this fundamental shift, and like we've never talked about that. I've never talked about this in a design program. This has never come up in work. I've never even heard of some of these phrases. Like, I don't even know what you mean by true self and false self. So some of these are like, social work or psychology concepts from many decades ago. But I think that I see these things as so ever present with designers, and especially with researchers who want to do a good job, who are doing a fantastic job, and feel like they have to almost like abandon a bit of themselves in order to do that work. I'm coming from a place of, we don't have to do that, but we do need to add some additional skills to protect ourselves as well as protect others that we are bringing into this process. And there are 101 different ways that we can do that.
So when you look towards the future of design, right, when some of the students you have now are out leading teams 10, 15 years from now, maybe sooner, what do you see? What's the future of design?
Taking a futures lens to trauma work is something that I've been exploring a little bit on the side. So I've been thinking about the type of ways that students want to engage in this work now. And another element that I see as coming is how do we get savvy enough and comfortable enough in doing the work that is present right in front of us? And at the same time, how do we build this very solid, true resilience to be able to anticipate future trauma? I'd like to be able to say that we could mitigate all of that and we will have no future trauma. Like, how fantastic would that be? But I'm a bit too much of a realist and just know that there are future situations and disasters and catastrophes that we need to be preparing for and thinking about now. So students are not the ones who are behind. When I interact with students, it's like I feel like I'm speaking with someone who fully understands what I'm talking about. And it's not to say that design educators are opposite of that, but I think the design curriculum as a whole and the accreditation of that curriculum is definitely behind. I could say the same for social work as well.
Rachel, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks, Lee.
Design As is a podcast from Design Observer. Did you know about their newsletters? Here's Editor-in-Chief Ellen McGirt.
I am really excited about our newsletters. Of course, for anybody who's been around Design Observer a long time, there's the Observatory, where we take the best of what we've observed about the world of design and share them every other week. And then there's the weekly Equity Observer. That's my jam, and that's where you're going to hear my take on what's happening in the world of business design and beyond, with an eye towards sustainability and equity and making the world a better place. And I know it seems silly. Newsletter is just an email, but it's an email that comes directly to you. It's personal. It's a wonderful way to develop relationships with folks, and it's a wonderful way to get cutting-edge reporting in the hands of people right when they need it. So I'm excited about 2025 for our newsletter business.
To see more, you can subscribe at designobserver.com/newsletters. I'm here with Sophie Hodara in Northeastern's recording studio on June 24th. Hi, Sophie. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here with you right now.
Sophie Hodara is an assistant teaching professor in the College of Arts, Media, and Design at Northeastern University.
Yeah, and I primarily teach classes in interaction design and in immersive media, or what we call immersive media here, which is essentially virtual reality, augmented reality.
Sophie, so we used to share an office on Northeastern's campus, and we've since moved, and I'm wondering what you've been working on recently.
I've been working on trying to rewrite my teaching philosophy. Like, what is the role of community? And maybe I realized that for me, it's actually, I mean, that word is really big. It can mean a lot of things.
It's huge.
And for me, I realized it's about, I want my students to feel like they are working in a world that they can relate to and like see the impact in. And so making their world tangible to us or to people outside of it.
Well, how does it happen in the classroom? I mean, it makes sense, but I'm wondering, in a very tactical sense, how do you create that environment in the classroom to engender that?
So there's a couple things. This is such a bullshit answer, but I think you just show up as yourself, as an educator, right? As the leader. I think you do that. I think you just you show up and you're very transparent about where you are and what your intentions are. And that sets an example. But also, I think that the evidence that I use is actually in the projects that I design. So, for example, we did these is like intro class, but like we did a redesign of the COVID wellness check. Mm-hmm. And, I realized that was really important that the students, I think that was sort of the first one I did where I was like, oh, I want my students to work on projects for Northeastern students. So we did other projects for helping freshmen get oriented at Northeastern. We did a project. Also, a lot of the projects I'm realizing it's like, we're right here at Ruggles Station. Like, how do we take advantage of making work for this space? Yeah. So I think, making things very relatable and proximate, local.
Sophie, I want you to tell me about a project that you think you should share with our listeners and why it's important.
Me and Anne McDonald, another colleague of Lee and mine from Northeastern, me and Anne, we just found out this morning that we're going to the same artist residency program, Design Inquiry, in Poland at the end of July. So we're going to be in Warsaw, drinking, making screen prints together. I'm going to tell you about a project that I haven't started yet. So who knows?
Brilliant. Okay.
So the theme of this residency is rupture and repair. And they start by asking, the application, which is very informal, starts by just asking you about a time in your life where you rupture or repair played a role. And so I thought about a body of work that I made, hence this is why I'm using this to answer your question, where during COVID, I left my marriage and I left Boston and I moved to New York. And then I proceeded to make a body of work kind of about the distance. And I took photos from a telescope very high up from a skyscraper. I used my iPhone to take these pictures and videos. And I really keep coming back to this work because for me, it was like a form of repair. So it's a form of practice and making-based practice that, I guess allowed me to reflect and on my distance from the rest of the world, which I think was really relatable at that time. We were all isolating. And so I'm going to go to Poland with this project in mind. And I want to see, hopefully I can learn what other people were doing how are people recovering from the pandemic? That's kind of a jump, but I hear my students talk about the pandemic and they're like, it's over. Like that was, I took class with you. It was the beginning of the pandemic or the end of the pandemic. But it's actually still there. And I think it was really traumatic. Even if you didn't lose your marriage or change your location,
or lose a loved one. I mean,
there's so much. And I think that we're I think there's a lot there that we're not addressing. And so I don't know, I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had about how we recover as a community, as a city, as individuals from this huge disruption, this rupture caused by COVID-19 in 2020. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, what are other people doing or what are the other conversations people are having about this?
I'm curious too, and I hope we hear more about that this week. So, Sophie, thank you so much for being here with us. Have a great conference.
Thank you so much.
I'm with Georgia Lupi at Northeastern's recording studio. It's June 25th, 2024. Georgia Lupi is an information designer, a partner at Pentagram, so much more. How would you describe yourself, Georgia?
Yeah, Lee, definitely. I'm an information designer. That means that every day I work with data, actually, data that can be qualitative or quantitative, and that together with my team, we translate into visual experiences of any kind. I'm a partner at Pentagram, and since I joined Pentagram quite a few years ago, I've also started to work on more traditional branding projects. And I think that as much as data visualization and brand identity look very separate as field, I think lately I've been really thinking that what brings them together is the aspect of stories. With data visualization, I usually tell different stories where data is the pretext to, again, think about facts and quantity and qualitative details. But really also, if you think about what a brand is a story that through different visual devices, logo, typography, photography, can be at the same time what the company wants to express and hopefully what the customers or clients actually want to relate to. So that's how I'm thinking about the two disciplines within design connecting.
In preparation for your keynote tonight, I've been doing a lot of research on your work. And as a consultant, I've seen the worlds of data science and design consulting, design generally, trying to come together. And you just described them as separate things. But in you, in your person, in your body, they're one. That's a unique position.
I think so. Yeah, I really feel that there are one. So I'm from Italy originally, and one thing that I like Massimo Vignelli that he used to say, so I'm going to quote him, that can be a little grandiose, but he said, if you can design one thing, you can design everything. And again, we might then disagree on the fact that you do have to have specific skills to, say, design a product that stands up and, doesn't like break itself for sure. But that's where I think then you tap into different specific skill sets in your team if you're lucky enough to work with the team. And I like to think that really like a design mindset and a real design way to thinking about process and planning and making can lead you to so many different avenues within design, and that's very exciting.
This evening, you're going to give your keynote in a session called Design and Recovery, or Design for Recovery, I believe. Talk about your experience with recovery and the project that I think you're going to be featuring in that conversation, and really where you plan to take it.
Sure. So I will be sharing a visual op-ed, so an opinion piece that I published in the New York Times last December, so December of 2023. There was a visual account of my experience with long COVID. Long COVID, for who's not familiar with it, is a chronic illness that is similar to other post-viral infections. So, I think at this point in time in 2024, probably all of your listeners maybe would have contracted an acute COVID infection. And the truth is, for most people, that really doesn't have a lot of consequences. But for some of us, and we really don't understand yet who and why some people get long-term consequences, an acute infection and subsequent reinfections can start to lead to various very disparate health problems. And that has been the case for me. And I've been struggling with different daily symptoms and limitations for the past 4 years. And, again, because I'm a data person, what do I do as soon as I start to feel sick and having those symptoms? I start to collect data. So, for 4 years, I've been collecting data on the different kind of symptoms that I've been experiencing and many other data points, such as biometric from my smartwatch or, every level of activities that I was doing, foods that I was eating, level of stress, and so on, to really try and find correlations for myself and to present to the many different doctors that I was seeing, but also, to be completely honest, to keep me sane and to give me a semblance of control in a moment of deep uncertainty. I published this piece and, the whole thing is really like an interactive scrolling where people would see colored brush strokes percolating the piece, interacting with the text, and at some point they start to understand that the different colored brushes represent different symptoms. And at some point, like the culmination of the piece is really like a full calendar of my 4 years where readers will see really that there's like very few days that are empty, like that look like a canvas, but instead everything is very filled with colored brushes. And the reason why I really wanted to publish it is that when I was reading articles about long COVID, I could really just read a list of symptoms. And so, fatigue, headaches, nausea. And what I really think is that perhaps healthy people would say, well, sure, I'm tired after work as well, or I have headaches too. But I've never seen before I published the piece a thorough account of what it means to live with a chronic illness on a daily basis, something that I definitely didn't know before I contracted long COVID. So I published the piece, I got an incredible response, and I think probably your listeners will ask, so why design for recovery? Well, I'm not fully recovered, but I'm doing better. And at some point in my journey after I published the piece, which for me was a little bit of my experience coming full circle, I've decided to stop tracking the things that were wrong with my body, and I started a different kind of spreadsheet where I'm actually only tracking progress. The fact that I'm here in Boston with you and I'll be speaking at a conference, it's a win, it's a victory for me. Being able to walk for, a few minutes and then 10 minutes and then a little more, it's really like a victory, and so on. And, not to spoil it, but really, I think to me, the point of tonight will be to think about the data that we choose to look at, which are really the data that actually, data or stories, if we don't want to call them data, the data that shapes our experience. So that was a long-winded answer.
No, it's a beautiful answer. We're at a design research conference, and we hear a lot of thought leaders talking about, and some of them are even in the tech industry talking about your data, like you need to be in control of your data. But for you, your data is something completely different. You take the notion of your data, the sort of personalized notion of it, to another level. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, we all right now, I feel, we all produce data. If we have a smartphone, we do produce data. And most of the times we sign up for applications and we scroll through the text that is size 4 in points and just say, yes, okay, not really thinking about what data we give away. But that's, I think, is okay because ultimately we get a benefit out of it and, we just decide or maybe just not think about it too much. And this is a bit of the reality. And those data are interesting. And I think there are interesting things that you can gather and analyze from there, especially if you'll be able to then, compare your personal data to like a bigger community to see where you fit. And I'm thinking about, people that have devices where they track their running paths or, their performance athletically. And all of these, I don't know whether it's a Garmin, an Apple Watch, a Whoop Band, whatever it is, usually they have the community feature. That's, kind of interesting. But if you are a little bit more obsessed in terms of, really learning something about yourself, I think that the most insightful data are the one that you somehow craft, the one that starts with questions that you have as opposed to, these devices tracking my steps and my heart rate variability and how I sleep and gives me a score. But what is really that interests you? And I think most of the time, those are fundamental human questions. I've done many different projects over the years with obsessive data collection that I know it's not for everybody, but sometimes I'd stop and think about, all right, I feel like I'm complaining too much. What if for a week or two, I start to actually pay attention and track my complaints and understand, are they necessary? And so thinking about the one unit of a complaint, which is a quantitative effort, as in I've complained this time, but then starting to ask qualitative question, which is, okay, what was it complain about? Who did I complain it to? Was it really necessary? What does it tell me about myself? And I mean, this is one example, but I feel that if we engage, not maybe even for a long time, but for a little bit in this more active type of data collection, that's where we unlock real insights. And I feel that, more and more in the future, probably with AI, with our ability to speak to our phones and then possibly generate visualizations or even a spreadsheet by what we log, that will be easier and easier.
Is there something in particular that you would like to learn about yourself in the future?
Well, at this point, I think I've tracked and logged a ton. But as I move into what I hope is a bigger or more solid recovery from my chronic illness, one thing that I know that I don't want to do, and then I'll talk about data, is taking for granted anymore the beautiful things of life. Like right now, for example, for me, being here in this trip to Boston is incredible. Being able to go out to dinner is great. Being able to book a vacation to Italy, my hometown, after 3 years that I haven't been, it's fantastic. Being able to enjoy the sun outside and not be cooped up in my apartment because I've been housebound for quite a while in this journey is great. And I feel that what I really would like to do is through maybe some form of data collection, remind myself to never just really take these things for granted anymore. Because if there's one thing that this illness has been teaching me is how much freedom to make your decision and do whatever you want without limitation of consequences is actually, to me, the most important thing in life.
We're so grateful that you're here with us this week. I want to talk a little bit more about care in general, though, because that's kind of, I think, fundamental to your practice, too. You have I don't know if you call it a manifesto, but this kind of framework on data humanism. And this perspective is really thoughtful, and it takes something big and abstract, data, and reduces it down to the scale of the human being. And that seems like an incredibly caring act a nurturing act. I think you did that for yourself. I think you're doing it for other people. Can you talk about your role extending this philosophy?
Yeah, I love the way you put it. I never necessarily thought about it in conjunction with the idea of care, but I think you really hit a point. So my idea of putting out this manifesto of data humanism was at some point in 2016, because I kind of felt that I needed to have a red thread for my practice. I knew that I was really interested in context and detail and qualitative information together with anchoring everything in actual quantitative data points. And I knew that sometimes warm representation of data that are also embracing imperfection, made my audience relate more than a standard, very precise, bar chart. And I mean, I don't have anything against bar charts and pie charts, but I think sometimes our reality is so much more nuanced. And I also start to think about data visualization not as a way to simplify reality, because we wouldn't want something that is complex and nuanced and articulated to just be dumped down into those 10-point BuzzFeed, you learn it from this 10 bullet point kind of a thing. And so I started to think about, connecting data really to the human qualities that make all data what they are. And I like to think about data as plural sometimes, because I feel that when we also say data is, it speaks to an aggregated quantity as opposed to thinking about individual and granular data points. So long story short, I think the data humanism is my way of reminding people that ultimately data is or are human-made, because even if they come from a sensor, a human being designed the sensor and decided what to collect and what to leave out. So I don't think that there's ever going to be true objectivity in data, even if we all think about data as the pure truth, because ultimately they're all subjective. And this is not bad, but I think we all have to acknowledge it, together with, again, treating missing data, the data that we don't necessarily have because we couldn't collect them, as data points, and making our choices as designers who represent them very manifest, and so on. So I put together this, visual manifesto, and how do I think it will extend to people's work? Well, I've already seen it having a life of its own, and people talking about data humanism as if it was a real movement, even though it was actually just a little paper that I published on Print Magazine in 2016. And I feel that there has been other projects that I worked on that really then took a life of its own. And I think that is when people take it on and experiment and change it and manipulate it in a way that makes sense for them, I think that it's really when good things and beautiful explorative things can happen.
Well, I hope many more beautiful, explorative things happen for us. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you again to Gedalia Brito, Rachel Dietges, Sophie Hodara, and Georgia Lupi for taking the time to sit down with me. Design As is a podcast from Design Observer. For a transcript and show notes, you can visit our website at designobserver.com/designaz. You can always find Design As on any podcatcher of your choice. And if you like this episode, please let us know. Write us a review, share it with a friend, and keep up with us on social media at Design Observer. We'd love to give you a seat at our roundtable however we can. Special thanks to Maxine Philivong at the Northeastern Recording Studio and Design Observer's Editor-in-Chief, Ellen McGirt. This episode was mixed by Judy Bell Kamanian. Design As is produced by Adina Karp.